It got to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. And that's exactly what I tried to do. I put a gun in my mouth and I pulled the trigger.
TJ Sheehan got into the oil patch young. The lifestyle was fast paced, but when the recession hit in 2008, he needed to find another way to make ends meet.
That's when I started, selling drugs. That's when I got involved in, the gang lifestyle and into large shipments of, drugs, guns, and everything else.
He got in deep: cocaine addiction, alcoholism, and when he saw no other way out, he attempted to take his own life. But the universe had other plans, and that's when he ended up in an AA meeting.
Things changed because I was able to tap into deeper spirituality, forgiving other situations, forgiving other resentments, most importantly, forgiving myself, right? Because I carry this backpack full of rocks of guilt and shame around, and until I could forgive myself, I couldn't even move forward.
In this episode, Donna and I talked to TJ about what it was like going to the oil patch at 16 years old, how cocaine addiction, alcoholism, and his need to survive brought him to gang life, and how he found his way into recovery. But before we get into it, what's up? My name's Dan. I'm joined in studio by my wife and co-host Donna. We are podcasters, keynote speakers, and advocates, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, your addictions podcast. Now, let's get into our talk with TJ Sheehan.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
What's up, TJ? How are you?
Really good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and thanks for reaching out. It's been actually a long time coming. We've been sort of going back and forth for a while now. But I listened to your story, and I have to admit I forget which other podcast I listened to it on. But man, it's pretty wild. So I'm happy to have you, man, and I'm happy to have you sharing your story tonight. Kind of stumbling around for words here right now as Donna's vaping away.
Sure. I'm doing it away from the microphone so as not to be.
Yeah. So, anyways, TJ, is there anything that you'd like to say before we get started tonight?
No, I'm just ready to dive in and, have the experience. I'm glad to be here and, glad to be on the show.
All right, cool. Well, why don't we start at the beginning then? What was it like for you growing up? Was this substance use something that got started really early on?
Yeah, I mean, growing up for me, there's a lot of trauma that I didn't really understand what was happening. My family was alcoholic. My grandpa was an alcoholic. My mom was an alcoholic. And, I was born into the disease, and I had a pretty good childhood, like in the beginning, there was lots of fun, hunting, fishing, all that kind of stuff. And then there was, some rough times, some abuse, sexual abuse happened at a young age, and that kind of spiraled everything to, a life full of trauma and trying to fight this disease. So it definitely wasn't easy. There was bullying and, just that kind of violence starting from a young age. And that's kind of how I grew up.
Uh-huh. So, you keep mentioning bullying and abuse and things like that. Now, was that stuff that was happening in the home, or was that out in the community?
It was out in the community. There was, when I was younger, there were some neighbors that, that's kind of how that whole story went. And then really physical abuse from my dad. He was just really very angry person. And, I grew up in survival mode, and that's all that I knew was just how to survive and not necessarily how to be a kid and how to have fun and how to enjoy, but it was just more so of how can I not get things wrong so I don't get in trouble or get beat or get hit or whatever that is. Right.
Mm-hmm. So when you started using substances, was the conversation around you one of don't do drugs? Like your family or whatever? Was there any conversations that were trying to steer you away from it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the first time I drank alcohol, I was 12 years old, and that ended in me getting my stomach pumped, waking up in the hospital. That probably sparked the first conversation, with my mom, and you would think that that would be kind of, a horrible situation to kind of have some thoughts around that and some boundaries, but it wasn't. That was just the beginning, right? So after the alcohol came the weed and just the spiral out of control, right? I was so uncomfortable with who I was that when I drank, it gave me this sense of like relief, right?
Mm-hmm. So it was all in for you right away.
All in, all or nothing. That's pretty much how most of my life goes, right?
Yeah, I can relate. Mm-hmm. So, did it get really bad for you? Like, was it fun at first, or was it just all bad right away?
I think there was some moments of fun for sure, but it seems like every time that I drank, there was something that would happen, right? It was either
Mm,
broken hands, smashed vehicles, interactions with the police, and this is just at, 14, 15 years old. And then it just kept going from there, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what did the parents say when it came to coming home with broken hands, coming home in a police car, things like that? Were they tolerant, or did you get kicked out, or what did that look like?
Well, I mean, basically at 15 years old, I was, kicked out of high school. I started fighting back, and that just resulted in me being kicked out. I was a wild card. No one wanted to deal with me. My mom had a new relationship, and I was kind of the troubled step kid. And 15, I was kicked out. Homeless, no education, and I had to kind of fend for myself. And I ended up finding a place to live that was a grow up, and that was my first introduction to how I'm gonna create a living for myself. I wasn't going to school. I
Mm-hmm.
had some older guys that were kind of going to show me how to grow and how to trim and how to process everything, and that's what I went into, right?
Mm. Did you feel privileged at the time? Like, were you excited about it?
I mean, I was excited when I got paid, right? And that's kind of, one addiction turns to another. But I was, 15, 16 years old. I had a truck, I had a boat, I had a motorcycle, I had all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And all my friends were still going to school. I didn't go to my graduation or my high school prom or any of that kind of stuff. And, that was kind of the start of that lifestyle, right?
Mm. Mm.
That's all I knew.
So it sounds to me like in a way that you were quite privileged by your own devices. Did you feel like you were on top of the world, or like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, at what point did you start to realize that you were running away from yourself?
I mean, that probably came many years later, right? So, I started kind of in this lifestyle of crime at a young age, and I had no idea what it was. It was just exciting,
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in a small town, and I kind of burned every bridge and opportunity that I had given to me, and I had to make a choice. And I moved to Alberta, lied about my age. I heard about these oil rigs that you can make all this money. And that's what I did at 16, 17. I was working on a drilling rig in the middle of Alberta with a bunch of alcoholic, angry men. And, you know, um, started making good money, but there was the addiction that came with that. There was the negativity that came with that. I had to grow up from a boy to a man right away. And again, it was that survival mode, right? Whether I was surviving from my dad or surviving this, work life of absolute hell. I mean, it's wintertime, it's like minus 30, minus 40, and you're out there working 12 hours a day. And I'm only 15, 16, 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I knew, right? But you got to make the best of it. And, I find when I was in my addiction, I was a chameleon. So I would fit into whatever situation would keep me, quote unquote, the safest, whatever that looked like, whether it was financially or whatever.
Mm-hmm. When you got to the rigs, and like, I worked in northern Alberta for I worked in northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, quite a bit as a welder, a journeyman Red Seal welder by trade. And I guess what I'm interested to know is, like, when you were in there, when you were in that environment, in your addiction, did you see anything other than addiction? Like, was there people there that weren't partying, that were living a healthy lifestyle?
Looking back now, I mean, when you're in it and you have the blinders on, it's really hard to see anything else. And I didn't even really think I had a problem then, right?
Mm,
It was normal to be drinking beers after work or on the crew truck. And then that just spiraled into, everything that the oil field is. But, there wasn't really healthy mentors at that time. The guys that were, mentors to me were the guys that were like the drillers and the positions that I wanted to be and had the big trucks and all the stuff. But when you look at their lives, like it was a mess. And that's what I was creating for myself was a mess. I just didn't realize it.
mm. So at what point did you start to realize then? Like did you have any stints of sobriety, or at least abstinence, like, throughout your life?
I mean, there was times when I would drink and it would just be for fun going out and wasn't 0 to 100 right away. But eventually it would be, right? Eventually there was times where I'd go out to the bar with the boys, get in a fight, get kicked out, get fired. And it was kind of just this cycle, right? And then, after 10 years, I worked hard on the rigs. I worked myself up to driller, relief rig manager, and,
Mm.
Gained a lot of experience. But at the same time, every year that went by, it just started to get worse and worse. And then, harder drugs would come into the scene. And then it was selling some of the drugs at work and making more money. And, then I think it was around 2008 or something, the recession hit. I had a house, I had vehicles, I had, a pretty comfortable life on the outside, but then everything went to shit and I had to figure out how to make that money. Right.
Mm.
So that's when I started, selling drugs. That's when I got involved in, the gang lifestyle and everything that came with that, and that was another transition of 0 to 100. Right.
It's interesting that you mentioned '08 because that was in 2008. That was right when Donna and I met.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a couple of months after Donna and I met that recession hit. I was working in Fort McMurray at Albion Sands.
Mm-hmm.
And by then I'd realized my own pattern because like I could go up north and work and not use. But as soon as I came back to town, I would be,
Mess.
yeah, it would be a mess. It would be all methed up. So, so it's interesting that you brought that up. No one else has ever brought that up before. You are the first one that talked about being affected by that recession in '08. So I was there too, man.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of people that were affected, but we're survivors and we figure it out. Right.
Yeah.
And that's just what we do. And sometimes it's not figuring it out in a healthy way. It's just figuring out to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, what I'm sure you guys have done and I've done for a long, long time until it was that pivotal point where it was just couldn't do it anymore. Something had to
Yeah.
change.
So it's always interesting to ask when people make a life transition like that. Now you were already using it and partying and fighting and all of the things while you were employed, but when you stopped, that employment ended. Like for me, when it ended, like within a couple of months, I was trying to cook meth because I was like, well, you remember, I was like, I'm not working for the man no more.
Yeah.
And like, then I go and buy $8,000 worth of laboratory glass and try to break bad in Donna's basement. When we'd like met like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think there was even a point where I was like judging you for allowing me to do that in your house. It's like,
I don't think I fully understood what it was you were doing
Yeah.
initially, right?
Well, apparently me neither, because I
Yeah.
never actually was able to cook.
No.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So, but like, what was that for you? The reason I bring that up is like, for me, it was like, I was sort of angry because, I got laid off and it just was like, I didn't want to work the grind anymore. So I chose to go down that road. What was the reasons for you?
Well, I think it first started was just to pay the bills, from, being basically homeless at 15, having my own house and not having to rent and not having to worry about a landlord, and everything was so important to me. I mean, I bought my first house at 25 and that was the security that I could give myself. So at first it just became, I'm going to sell a little bit of drugs here just to pay my bills. And then, the lid came off and it was like, wow, this lifestyle is, I can have lots of money. I don't have to work for anybody. I can do it on my own. And that's what it turned into. Right. So then it kind of brought back that exciting feeling of when I was younger, but this wasn't just growing a little bit of weed in a small coastal town. This was, eventually moving into large shipments of, drugs, guns, and everything else. And the consequences come real quick when you're in that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like you enjoyed it for a while.
Absolutely. I mean, ego, edging God out. I didn't know what spirituality or God or any of that was in my life. I was just living that high, fast lifestyle. I mean, on the rigs, yes, it's hard work. Yes, you're away, but most of the guys that are out there because they love the big equipment. They love to do things that other people can't do. And that's what kind of that criminal lifestyle became for me. And it did become addicting. It was really addicting.
Mm. So tell us a little bit then about your, like the descent. Like, what were some of the things that started to happen that finally led you to the decision to enter recovery?
Well, I mean, where do you start? I mean, there was alleged kidnapping that happened, and I had, the alert and SWAT team raiding my house, arresting me and searching everything, and um, telling me I was going to be put away for 10 years in jail. I had a whole whap of charges.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the reasons. My house got shot up in a drive-by shooting, 7 shots a foot from where I was sleeping, and that happened. Still wasn't enough. I wouldn't leave the house, to go to Walmart without a vest and a gun on. And, as I started not using drugs, and then it became the paranoia, and then it became the reason to escape. And then it just kept getting more and more, and being on house arrest, wondering when someone's going to try to kill you. And then combination with all the drugs, it got to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. And that's exactly what I tried to do. I put a gun in my mouth and I pulled the trigger, and, that gun jammed. I've told this story many times, and that was kind of my God moment. It's like shit or get off the pot. You either continue and you're going to die or end up in jail, or you start to make some hard decisions and figure this thing out, because it's not getting any better. So that was basically, my first introduction to making that choice, making that hard choice. And I got myself to a 12-step meeting and started to reverse engineer this disease that I had, and learn about it and understand it, and figure out why, right? I didn't know why. I just thought I did drugs and couldn't stop, right?
Tell me about your first meeting. Like, was it hard walking down those stairs? Because, I mean, it sounds to me like you're quite experienced. Like, I can tell you're saying certain key words that I recognize from somebody who might be well-versed in the literature and in the fellowship. So for me, like walking down those stairs or walking through those doors and sitting in that chair, to me, that's like the beginning of step one, right? Like we came to believe, right? Or sorry, we admitted. It's an admittance of powerlessness, is of defeat. Like, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I grew up in the rooms of AA. I just had no idea what it was, right? My mom would bring me, and I was that little kid that was annoying, that was running around or banging or,
That was my son.
interrupting someone's share, right?
Yeah.
And I had no idea, right? And I didn't even realize the struggle that, my family went through with their own addiction, going to treatment. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was time for me to face it and actually take it seriously, yeah, I mean, I always hear people say walking down those stairs, but that's usually exactly what it is walking down the stairs in a church. And, for me, the God or religious thing, it was just something that I was not willing to look at. And, the churches where everyone goes to pray and to worship and do all that stuff upstairs. But here I am walking down in the basement. So that already gave me the sense of separation, that I was different. Right. And then when I got into the room, it was a men's meeting, and I'll never forget it. 50 guys in there, all different walks of life, all different experiences, all different, career paths. But yet I would hear my story in just about every single one of those guys. And, here I was, this so-called, tough gangster guy. And I was sitting there and I just started bawling, because I finally felt like I was somewhere that I belonged, and I didn't even know anyone's name. And when it came my turn to share, and I said, my name's TJ, I'm an alcoholic, I just felt this wave that was just lifted off of me, because I could admit that I was different, but I at least knew why I was different, right? Or I was starting to unravel what separated me from normal people. I was an alcoholic. I was an addict. I had a disease that was not going to be cured. Every day I had to work on this thing.
So let's take just a quick break here, and I'll read out tonight's sponsors, and then we will jump right back in. Okay, Métis Nation Saskatchewan has announced its path to the pursuit for self-government. As an MNS citizen, I am proud to see my government fight to protect my rights. This is our moment. To learn more about the treaty and our path to self-government, go to ourmoment.ca. EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based and medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. To learn more, find their link in the show notes below. Pine Lodge, the treatment center I went to 7 years ago when I got sober, offers inpatient addictions treatment and aftercare programming in Regina, Saskatchewan. To inquire about services or to make a donation, call 306-510-1891. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness-related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals, locally allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. Are you affected by someone else's substance use? Family and friends can be okay and do recover. Nar-Anon can help. Contact Ronnie at 306-731-7573 for meeting information. To make contact or to learn more about today's sponsors, to check out our merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below. So did you buy in right away? I mean, you just mentioned that you had an experience where you felt a weight lifted, that you maybe it was like, did you finally have a glimmer of your own identity?
I wouldn't say it was that quick. I was closed off at first, in the moment I was bought in, but then when I went to go digest and when, the drugs and alcohol were still there and that was my coping mechanism, it wasn't right away. Right. But I just remember that feeling that I kept getting. And the only thing that I could really do to find, for lack of a better term, salvation from what I was experiencing was that hour that I was in the basement of a church with a bunch of people that were discussing everything that I was going through or had gone through. Right. So it really, they say sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. For me, it was a slow process, but once it started to click and once I really made that decision, that non-negotiable for myself, things really started to change.
So then where did you ever try to go back to, they say the old playgrounds, the old playmates and stuff like that? Like, was this an abrupt cut for you? The old life is now done. This is my new life. Or was it more of an integrated process?
Yeah, it was definitely more of an integrated process. I mean, everything that I had set up in Alberta, even as I was pulling out of the, the gang lifestyle, the drug trade and everything else, I had a business and I was really trying to focus in on that. But eventually it just came to the position, I was in a super toxic relationship and I just couldn't escape the bullshit. And, so I moved to BC. I packed up everything and I moved back to BC, to that small hometown that I was, born and raised in. And that's, again, it came down to another decision, right? Things had to change. But what was different was when I went back to the small community that I grew up in, all my friends were dying or dead. I lost I used to say 30, it's almost up to 40 now. And, overdose, huge ones, suicide, murder, and some are in jail. But, that was the point that I kind of started to find my purpose. And that was to use my experience to help others, because we can't do this alone. But once I found that sense of purpose, it really started to get quickly, right? It really started to get some momentum of the life separation. And I started to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to get there. And that's when things, started to really change.
So did you have any kids by this time?
No kids.
No kids. And you mentioned toxic relationship. Was that it probably was a thread throughout your life. I know for me, like my substance use would get pushed underground in relationships past and things like that. Was there any difference for you in your using, like when you found a relationship as opposed to when you were single?
I mean, not much, there was always something to escape from, and sometimes that was a relationship too, right? Until I could be healthy and understand who I was, any relationship that I got into was unhealthy, or I destroyed it, right? Because I was the destroyer of my life. And unfortunately with my addiction, I was also the destroyer of everyone's life who was around me, right? And that was a big part of the cycle, right? Because the guilt and the shame and especially a lot of the things that I did, not necessarily in relationships, but in the lifestyle that I was living, I'd close my eyes at night and I had to deal with that. That wasn't the core of who I was in my being, as a person. And I was doing these things that would just add to the cycle. And the only way I get relief is to numb it out,
Mm-hmm. Did you miss the chaos in early recovery?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did. There'd be nights I'd be sitting in my bed on a Friday night at 8:00,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be like, this is weird. Like, I'm just waiting for something to happen, or I need to go do something, because you're just literally, thriving in that chaos. Right. And for so many years until it's, something that you can look back on and be like, man, how did I used to live like that?
Or even the first time you get together with like a group of people and you're sitting there and you're like, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
Like, this is just so weird.
Yeah. Like
nobody's passing a joint around, nothing. Like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Well,
There's nobody even trying to steal my cell phone right now.
And I don't need help being weird in a social situation.
Yeah.
Well, and it takes relearning how to live. I mean, I still barely go to a restaurant, and I always sit with my back against the wall and my eyes at the door.
To this day.
Right? To this day. And I do it just out of habit. It's not something that I seek and go in and say I have to watch the door. It's just I've been, instilled in that survival mode that I go there and I sit and I'm always just watching. I'm people watching. I'm kind of just like this still, right?
Mm-hmm.
Head on a swivel. And I don't want to be like that, but it's, sometimes that instinct just gets instilled in you so hard, that it's hard to break.
I still do stuff like that, to like completely unconsciously. When I'm walking, I'm always aware of like who's around me and what's happening and all those kinds of things as well. How long have you been in recovery, TJ?
So I'll be coming up on 4 years in August.
Yeah, I have to admit, like driving down certain streets.
Yeah.
You looking at the people at the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Just looking.
Scanning.
Yeah.
Certain stores, certain places where I used to frequent, or
certain dumpsters. Man, I miss dumpsters. Man, like there's days where like I'll see a good construction dumpster and I'll like slow down, man. Like, something's poking out. Like there was like lattice, like just because like we're doing home stuff here, and I saw some lattice poking out of a dumpster. I'm like, oh, that looks awesome.
And once in a while, I like scope out other people's finds too. I'm like, oh, hey, good find, man.
Yeah, checking out their flail cart.
Yeah. Or like, hey, excellent build, right on. You got some skills there.
Yeah, I saw a tandem flail cart one time. I did, yeah. So TJ, I don't know if you know what the heck we're talking about, but like we like Donna and I both used to dumpster dive back in our addiction, and we had these carts that we would pull behind our bikes, and we called them flail carts, and so anyways, they can be quite creative.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But anyways, we digress.
Yes, sorry. We get carried away sometimes.
Love it. No, I mean, it happens. I mean, I was under surveillance so many times, and I would catch some of these police and following me and everything else. And it's still like, if I see someone parked up my road or someone following me for 3 turns in a row, it's like, what is happening, and it's hard, to be around people that are normal and you still have these, idiosyncrasies that stick with you. And it's like, how do you explain that? Right.
Yeah. Have you ever found yourself in situations where people are like, why you keep looking at the door?
I mean, somewhat. I think most don't really ask me. I mean, unless they're, people that are close to me or trying to get to know me. But, I'm most people know my background. Most people that I surround myself with, which is very small, know the reason why I am the way that I am. But again, it's subconscious, and it's, sometimes it's something I'm trying to break, but sometimes there could be, reason for it. It might get you out of a sticky situation.
So tell us then about your first year. You mentioned that you came into your purpose. Now, I would like to go a little bit deeper than that, because I know in my first year, I had certain revelations that, some of them put a weight on my shoulders, and some of them took a weight off of my shoulders. And one of the biggest ones I learned in my first year, and I continue to learn this to this day, is that sometimes I'm an asshole too. Like I resentment almost killed me in early recovery. I know more than I did then, but like that's just an example. Like, can you tell us some of the realizations that you had either through step work or through helping others or whatever that really helped you make the rubber hit the road?
Totally. I mean, the biggest one for me was the the people who abused me. So when I moved back to that small town, it was two brothers. And because of my history and because of their resentments, I wanted to seek revenge in a bad way.
Mhm.
And I was ready to. I didn't really care. I was ready to find these guys, and I was ready to handle what I needed to handle. And it wasn't until this old gentleman came to the coast for whatever reason. He traveled around to different AA meetings and tried to get the Back to Basics program going. And it was Back to Basics was a quick little book that you do the steps. And it's basically, for me, it was how to do the steps for dummies. And the forgiveness, he taught me how to forgive these individuals so that I would actually forgive them, not just say that I did. And I did. And that was one of the God shot moments that I was able to forgive these two brothers. And if I see them on the street right now, I would probably just walk past them or maybe strike up a conversation because, maybe something was done to them. That's usually the cycle. But once I was allowing myself to have that forgiveness, things changed because I was able to tap into deeper spirituality, forgiving other situations, forgiving other resentments, most importantly, forgiving myself, right? Because I carry this backpack full of rocks of guilt and shame around. And until I could forgive myself, I couldn't even move forward.
Yeah, definitely keep you stuck in a cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so then what? You find some relief. You hear some things that you need to hear. What did your first version of a good life look like?
Well, I just threw myself into service and into helping others. I knew that the only way I was going to stay sober was to help others. And, I had my little fitness business, and it was kind of right in the middle of COVID, I think. I transitioned everything online, and then I sold it. And I took every dollar that I had, and I decided I was going to build a treatment center. I didn't care, what was going to stop me. It was going to be nothing. And that's what I did. And, I took a lot of criticism for it because I think I was only like six or 8 months sober at the time. And here I am in the small community where people talk, and I'm building this treatment center. And people are like, you're only 6 months sober, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
But they didn't realize that was life or death for me. That was the only way I was going to stay sober, was to throw myself into something, the old Christopher Columbus where he burns the ships, and just go for it. All in, burn the boats. Right. And that was it. And that's what I did. And that's what kept me sober. And for me, if I didn't stay sober, I was going to die. That was just a reality.
So, undertakings like these they're scary. There's no way around it. There's a lot of fear. At least that was my experience, like building this platform. It's such a unique thing. And, you get into entrepreneurship, and people like me, like I like to, what I call time travel. If something goes a little bit wrong today, holy cow, I better go check out what that's going to look like in 5 years from now. And then it's a smoking pit in the ground in my mind. And then I'm filled with fear and I can't even see straight. Can you relate to that?
I can. I mean, there was so many times where I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But at the, and at the end of the day, the fear was there, but the determination was stronger. I would not let myself fail. Like, obviously I failed many times. That's how I learned, but I wouldn't let that failure be the end. I would use that failure to fall, slam my face in the dirt, get up, learn from it, try it again. And that's basically what it is. I remember I spent every dime. I was fighting the town. They wouldn't give me the license. They wouldn't give me the zoning. I renovated this whole building, and I was down to like my last $2,000, and I had no idea what to do. And I just jumped in my car. I bought a ticket to the Recovery Capital Conference in Alberta. I drove out there. I talked, I mingled. I just trusted the process. And coming home, I came home with 2 of my first clients. And that was how I started. I had no idea how. I just knew what I wanted to do. And, the universe provided because I was on the right path, because I was living the principles and living by the 12 steps. I mean, Some people may, disagree with the 12 steps, but for me, that was a design and a program for living that I could follow,
Mm-hmm.
that no matter what roadblock I hit, there was always an answer. It wasn't necessarily the answer that I wanted, but there was an answer there that was going to get me to where I needed to be.
Recovery Capital conference tickets are not cheap. That must have been like, are you a praying man? Like, do you pray about things? Do you try to be cognizant of universal signs? Like, I really like to dissect that, because like I can relate so deeply to being an entrepreneur in recovery. What is it that, like, sometimes the fear pushes us? Sometimes the fear of success is scary too, but like, what was it for you that, like, I'm going to go to this Recovery Capital and spend a quarter of the money that I have left? And like that's a Hail Mary, man. Like, don't you think?
Absolutely. I'm not religious by any means. When I say God for myself, that's good orderly direction,
Mm-hmm.
or that's the great outdoors.
Mm.
And when I'm in the great outdoors, you know, the world speaks to me. I'm a very big believer in manifestation, in universal law, and that was it. And again, it was kind of the point where I'm like, I don't have a choice. Like, what do I have to lose here? Everything? Okay, well, I'm going to lose that anyway if I don't try. And like, so I just went for it. And yeah, the fear, I mean, I was sweating the whole drive there, and I was like, what if? And I
Mm-hmm.
always remember my mom, she tells me, because I'm like, what if this goes wrong? What if this? And she goes, well, what if it goes right? What if it works out? And that's what I try to base a lot of my fear on, is to like bring myself back to center and say, well, what if it works out?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I just show up, the universe will do the rest. It may not be exactly the way that I want it, but there's a message and there's a blessing in the lesson all the time, right? I always say
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, it's trusting that process, as hard as that is, turning your fear
Yeah.
into faith. Like, where's the manual for that? There isn't one. It's just through experience of like looking back and being like, man, all these different times that things could have worked out different, but here we are.
Yeah.
Here you guys are on your platform. I'm sure that, however long ago that was just a dream. You didn't know how you're going to do it, but look at you now, right? It's
Yeah.
just trusting the process and putting one foot in front of the other.
And sometimes it's a matter of just white knuckling it, tightening your boots up, and just like go. Just holy cow, man. There's times where I don't even know what to do. Like, I'll just be scrolling on my phone looking for some mystic answer on Facebook.
So
Like,
that's what you're doing.
What am I? Yeah, that's me being fearful and looking for answers. Yeah. Fear book.
I find too, like, if I ask the universe, like I literally ask,
Yeah.
it'll come. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get so caught up that I block the answers, but if I just get quiet and listen, it always comes.
Yeah, yeah. And to add to that, literally putting it out into the universe, telling people this is what I want, like knowing what you want and articulating it to people. Maybe people that don't even like, that don't even have the capacity to help you in any way, but just like you just put that out into the universe, and you're right, man. It somehow it comes back. It's the craziest thing, man. Like the bank account gets low, but for some divine reason, it never gets empty. As long as you're walking on like a path that you somehow that you're supposed to be on. I don't know how to explain it any other way than that.
Mm-hmm.
So
and I mean, just sometimes speaking it into existence. Like, I remember when, I was renovating and doing things, and I just said, I'm opening a treatment center, and I was barely even there, but I just kept speaking it and speaking it and speaking it. And, eventually it happened.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned great outdoors. Now, to me, that brings my thoughts to land-based healing. What is it about the great outdoors? Like, is it just the experience of being outdoors? Because the reason I ask this is I interviewed an elder from Sandy Bay, Elder Peter Morin, a few weeks ago. I drove up to Pine House. It was a beautiful experience, and something that resonated with me, and I don't know that I'll ever forget it, was he said that the courage to go live on the land was finding the courage to live on the land was a big part of what got him sober. So what is it for you? Why would you bring that up? The great outdoors.
Well, a big part for me is climbing mountains, hiking mountains, right? And usually there's so much that I learn about myself in that, because I'm with myself, I'm with my thoughts, I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking up at the summit, and I'm tired. I don't necessarily know the way, but I just keep going and I keep going. And I've taken lots of guys up on some of these hikes, and you get to the top, and that sense of accomplishment is something that I can't even describe unless you're sitting at the top of a mountain looking down at how far you come.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to go back down. It's not like you just go up to the peak and you're there. It's you're doing work both ways.
Oh, you don't have a
But when you
helicopter to
get
come
back,
get you?
no, not yet. So thankfully not yet. But I mean, you're going down, and going down sometimes is just as hard as going up.
Yeah.
Right? It's getting dark, you're hungry, and you have no choice but to just keep going. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's a lot of similarities to recovery. There you see the peak or the milestone, and you have to keep going. It's hard work. I mean, being addicted to drugs and living that lifestyle is hard. Being sober and living in recovery is hard. Choose your heart, right? Which one you
Yeah.
want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, it's just that sense of accomplishment of knowing that I can do something even if I don't want to do it.
So, and honestly, I heard Elder Peter's words in your message there. Obviously, climbing mountains takes a lot of courage, right? And I can liken that to my time with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I noticed very early on that nothing puts you in the moment faster than a guy on top of you trying to choke you out. So you got to find that thing that will snap you into the moment. And when you're climbing a mountain and you look down and you're high up and you don't know how you're going to get to the top, surely you've had to muster a lot of courage and overcome a lot of fear in those moments. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And I like to say now, like, the only time I get high is when I'm climbing a peak, right? Getting up to the top. And the fresh air, looking down. And, I've taken a lot of guys, like I said, on hikes, and sometimes I don't know the outcome. But the thing that keeps pushing me and that I have to stay confident is that I have these other guys that are watching me. And if I start to panic, then they're going to panic. So I always, keep going. Let's go. We got this, keeping them motivated. And that in turn keeps me motivated. And with my recovery, helping others walk this path is, one of the only things that keeps me sober.
Mm-hmm. So having opportunities to face your fear.
Absolutely. And
That's
do
beautiful.
it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, like, I've learned that, and this sort of brings me into another point I want to talk about. What about after the peak? I've crossed enough finish lines in my recovery to know that, like, I can celebrate those for a day. That's kind of cool. But the real gift to me is in that climb, is in the struggle. So can you relate to that? Like, I usually find, like, after I make an achievement of whatever, whether it's fostering a new business relationship or whatever, I'm excited for a bit, but then I can sink into a depression because it's sort of like, almost like I lose my identity, like I was the guy that was seeking these things. Now I'm the guy that found those things. Now I need something new to seek. Do you know what I'm saying? Have you ever experienced that?
Oh, multiple times. Right.
Yeah.
And again, if we're kind of using the metaphor of climbing a mountain, I mean, it's hard. You get up to the top. It's beautiful. You love it. You've accomplished it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now you got to go back down, and it's just as much work. And the only reward at the bottom is completing the process.
Yeah.
Right. And,
bragging rights.
well, exactly. And I mean, I've done it enough times that, I never have gone up to the top and come back down and say, I'm never going to do that again. So it's just preparing me for the next journey, the next mountain, the next challenge in life, whatever that is, right? The next challenge in my recovery. Every day, every milestone, every year is a challenge. And there's no free ride in this life, right? We got to work for everything, whether it's our business, whether it's recovery, whether it's relationships, whether it's on ourself. There's no free ride.
Gratitude is an action word.
100%.
Yeah. So what else, man? Any other milestones, any other challenges that you've faced in your recovery that you think might bring value to the conversation today?
Well, I mean, when you talk about identity, that was something that I would always struggle with. I was a kid growing weed. I was, a rig hand. I was, gangster. I was, director of a treatment center. But eventually, I did that for 3 years, and it wasn't what I set out to be, not to get political, but everything that was happening in Vancouver with the decriminalization and the safe supply. And I was having guys come through my program and do all this work, and we go hiking and canoeing and boxing and fitness, and they would do so well, and I'd watch them change, and they'd get out. And I said, the work starts the day you leave here. And next thing you know, they're hooked on hydromorphs and Dilaudids. And I would just watch the cycle go. And, I decided to leave the coast, move back to Alberta, close up the treatment center there. And that was my identity. That was everything that I knew. That was everything that I came back to the coast to prove myself, that I was this guy that was helping men in recovery. And, I moved to Calgary with no real opportunity or idea of what I was going to do. I just knew that that was not what I was going to do anymore. And, that identity crisis, that was hard to figure out what was next for me and how to trust that process. Right.
And how long did that take you? Actually, hang on. Before we do that, you mentioned safe supply and decrim as though it was a hindrance to the system. Do you think that was a mistake for the government to start issuing a safe supply? Do you think that they did it wrong, or do you think that should not be a thing at all? Or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, if you look at Portugal, right,
Yeah.
that has done the decrim and the whole process, there's a 4-pillar system there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
BC has only uncovered one of those pillars. And, it's an absolute disaster, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and, if they're gonna introduce that model, anyone in BC, Alberta, Canada, let's be honest, should be able to make one phone call, get one assessment, and be put into treatment for free that day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That should be the way it is. And I do a lot of work with youth. And I've seen these pills get into the hands of these kids that are, 13, 14, 15 years old. I mean, I don't disagree with harm reduction. Okay. There is a sense that harm reduction can reduce harm. Okay. And if you look back at the history of what it's supposed to do, absolutely. And I don't want to make this political, but some of our political leaders and the things that are happening, our country is not what it used to be.
Yeah.
And the sad truth is people are dying at a huge rapid rate. And there are also people that are capitalizing off the suffering of others.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could spend hours talking on this, but my short answer is it's a disaster and people are dying.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear that's sort of a buzzword in the talk about drug policy is the Portugal model, right? We haven't seen the Portugal model in Canada, like you mentioned. All I've really seen is a bunch of half measures that, to me, it seems like almost that they were set up to fail. Like it almost seems like certain organizations and certain initiatives are given enough rope to hang themselves and no more. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, but you're right. That's maybe a topic for another day. So you, go ahead.
Well, I don't even want to get into it too much because it's crazy what's happening. I mean, you can just, you see the crime, you see the court system, you see the people being released, and this is our future. Right. So, long story short, that's one of the reasons why I got out of BC, came to Alberta, the recovery-oriented systems of care. I'm not saying it's perfect here, but there's a lot more forward movement. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of amazing people in British Columbia that are doing amazing things and literally giving their lives to help people. Mm-hmm. But they're fighting a system that is too overpowered and corrupt to really make much of an impact that we want to make. Right.
Yeah. So, you moved to Alberta. Did you open another treatment center? Like what did you do? You mentioned that you had the identity crisis. How did you come out the other side of that?
Yeah, well, I did, I had a place here and, I was doing the same sort of thing, but it was the universe, telling me it's, that old saying where it's like, if you don't listen to the universe the first time, it's going to slap you in the face the second time. Right. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll have a couple clients and work with them and do that stuff. And I did it a few times and it it wasn't, it was exactly the same reason why, you know, I was kind of moving on to something different. So, you know, and then I just threw myself into networking and into finding out my purpose again and finding that identity again. You know, in the process of starting the treatment center, we also started a nonprofit called Pivot, Education, Empowerment, and Recovery Society. And that was, you know, kind of the catalyst to some of the things I'm doing now. I have some pretty cool opportunities now. And, you know, looking back again, when I first was opening the treatment center, I was terrified. When I was closing the treatment center, moving to Calgary, I was terrified. You know, but now I look back and I'm like, you know, that was just another chapter in the book that needed to happen. And here I am now, right? Exactly where I'm supposed to be.
So is it getting easier? I mean, because it seems like you're starting more new things and more new things. You've got your nonprofit, you're networking, you're meeting new people. Is it getting easier?
I don't think it ever gets easier. I mean, the work's always there. I think, you know, the message gets more clear, you know, to understand what needs to happen and you know, but the work's always there, the fear is always there, the financial insecurity is always there, the insecurities of, you know, am I enough, or am I making a difference, or, you know, is my lived experience really, am I doing it right? I mean, there's no manual for this stuff, but so no, it doesn't get easier, but you know, it's always worth it, right? When I, you know, some of the youth that I'm working with and some of the people and the impact that we're making, that's what makes it easy, I guess.
So are you still involved in the fellowship?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't go to meetings as religiously as I did, you know, when I used to hit 2 a day, but you know, the fellowship's always there for me. And, you know, it's something that I'll always have, right? I'll always be involved in 12 step one way or another.
And what does it look like for you today? Do you have like daily rituals, or when something goes particularly sideways, is there something like, oh, it's time to do this, or it's time to do that, or call this person? Like what sort of safety nets do you have in place to keep you on the right path?
I mean, as silly as this may sound, and I had a guy who we were deciding if we were going to work with each other the other day, and you know, I said, you know, making my bed. That's one of the first things I do every day. And he's like, oh, you're going to teach me how to make my bed? I think I can do that fine. And I'm like, buddy, it has absolutely nothing to do with how to make your bed. But every morning when I get up, I make my bed, right? And I spend that time to make it so that if I've had a shitty day, when I get home, I know that it's there and it's fresh and it's clean and it's ready for me. So, you know, that would be one of my first telltale signs, is if I'm getting up and not making my bed, that's just the first step of unraveling. You know, and physical fitness, that's another thing, right? That keeps me in shape mentally, physically. And, you know, that's one of my rituals. So if I start falling off from the gym, then I know that, you know, maybe there's something to look at. You know, you said gratitude's an action word.
Yeah.
You know, one of my rituals is I stand up in my room and look at the view and just thank the universe for this opportunity. And these are some of the things that keep me going, right? Because we can easily look at the world and get caught up in the negatives.
Yeah.
You know, I live my life on the 4 pillars of recovery, spirituality, nutrition, and fitness. So, you know, just for example, if something hits me hard financially and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? I literally will go and put on a money meditation manifestation and sit there for 20 minutes and just breathe and listen to that,
Manifest
or
money.
positive affirmation. Right?
You
Yeah. You
you
know,
make it sound easy.
well, and I mean, it's not, but it's just energy, right? So if you believe, I mean, I've had situations where I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I just trust the process, and it doesn't happen instantly, but it's like, oh, well, here's an extra $1,000 that just showed up out of the universe, right? And
That
it's, you
happens.
know,
Every time, man. It never fails. So, but you know, after overcoming all of these things in recovery, now I'm 7.5 years in. When hard times come, like, I'm not going to say that it's amazing and I'm just like all rainbows and ice cream and stuff like that, but I'm starting to feel a certain amount of gratitude when a struggle comes, you know, like I feel like I'm being offered an opportunity. Like I'm going to gain wisdom. So I'm like, thank you for the challenge. Like now I have an obstacle to overcome, because like a guy like me, the comfort zone isn't comfortable. Like when I get too comfortable, I stop moving forward. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But that's a mindset. You've developed a mindset that is going to keep you in that, forward motion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I never judge anybody, but when you look at a lot of people that are like, poor me, or this sucks, or bills are coming, or blah, 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 that's the life that they're going to get. If you can have that mindset because you're built with resilience and strong enough to say, there's a lesson in this, thank you for the struggle, you've got it. Right? Because you can get through anything and come out the other side to say, thank you for that struggle. It has taught me X, Y, and Z. That's something that not a lot of people have. And that's why I always say it, like, recovery is such a superpower, because being able to shift and have that mindset, or be in a position where, like, shit's hitting the fan, and you can sit there and say, there's a lesson in this. I'm going to take it.
Let's get hit with the shit in the face. Like, thank you.
Right. But again, that's a mindset that is developed over, struggle. Right. And that's a beautiful thing.
Calm seas don't make strong sailors.
100%. Lived experience saves lives. That's one of the things I always say. I recover out loud so others don't have to suffer in silence. And that's so important, because for me, when I first started out, I never wanted to admit I was an addict. And even still, I would always say alcoholic. And I'm like, no, I'm an addict. And once I could admit that I was an addict, then it's like, okay, well, I have this handicapped, but I'm going to deal with it. And there's a lot of transferable skills from being an addict, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, that's the truth. I've definitely done some creative things, and sometimes I tell myself, like, man, I'll bike halfway across Saskatoon at 3:00 in the morning at 30 below zero to get my dope. I can go to Home Depot and get a can of spray paint and fix this.
Yeah, 100%.
So where can people find you, man?
Well, I just started a new program. It's on Instagram, Gloves Not Guns Boxing. And what that is a youth boxing program for high-risk youth to keep them out of the lifestyle of drugs, gangs, and violence. And, so we really started that cool program. If you go to pivotsociety.ca, that's also a nonprofit website. And there's actually a free trauma training course that we've developed on there. We got a grant from the Red Cross, and we've spent the last year and a half developing, it's called Trauma Recovery Support. And you can go online, and it's a certifiable learning management system where you can go through all these modules and learn about trauma and addiction and come out with a certification totally free. And then also on Instagram at coastal_recovery community. And, if anybody needs help, you're not alone. So reach out. And there's a lot of cool things happening in Alberta. And, I'm all about the collaboration and working with others.
Cool, man. Well, I think that's it. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we let you go? Anything you'd like to leave us with?
Just to be gentle with yourself. The world's hard enough out there. And, until I could seek forgiveness for myself, I wasn't able to forgive others. And if I couldn't forgive others, that was my relapse. So just make sure that you're, gentle with yourself. And, there's power in being uncomfortable, so if you're feeling uncomfortable, there's strength in that, and just follow through with whatever it looks like. Do the uncomfortable shit.
Cool. I love that. All right, TJ, thanks so much for joining us tonight. That's it. Take care, my friend.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, if you got anything out of that, please give that like button a click. If you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications. We try to go live twice a week. We got like 300 episodes or something like that at the time of this recording for you to catch up on. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify and all the listening platforms. That's all I got for you tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.